some of the biggest challenges I have with clients are when both partners tend to be or lean towards the avoidant style of attachment. And when we put this into a cycle, meaning that when there's a rupture in the relationship and disconnection becomes part of how they're relating, then we call this a withdraw cycle, because both partners, due to their avoidant style of attachment, tends to shut down and withdraw. And this creates a real challenge for most therapists, because what ends up happening is neither partner wants to talk about the issues. Neither partner wants to rock the boat. Neither partner wants to upset the other or make things worse. So they end up in this sort of icy, cold standoff. And I picture in my head sort of the old Westerns where it's 12 noon and both of them are facing off in the noonday sun in the middle of an old town in the middle of a street. And this is sort of, staring at each other, hands poised on right next to their guns, but nobody's drawing, nobody's making a move. And this is sort of the picture that comes to my mind. And it's very difficult to get these people to try to engage, to get partners to try to open up when they both are leaning towards this avoidant style of attachment. And when both partners have this style, then we call that a withdraw cycle. And of course, it's a protective move. And both partners use withdrawing as a way to protect themselves when there's disconnection in the relationship. And as I've said, it's very difficult because neither partner feels safe enough to be vulnerable with the other and expose themselves enough to be able to communicate their wants and their needs in the relationship. So instead, they sort of cling to their life raft of safety, and they bob helplessly alone in an ocean, desperate for a connection. The withdraw cycle, as I've said, is created from each partner having an avoidant style of attachment. Now, to be clear, this is an unusual combination. Most couples are a mix between anxious and avoidant attachment, and we call those cycles pursue-withdraw cycles. So when one partner leans towards an anxious style of attachment, the other partner leans towards an avoidant style of attachment, then they create what we call pursue-withdraw cycles. But if you have two partners that are both avoidant, then that is a withdraw cycle. And so what happens if you're in a relationship when your protective move is to withdraw and your partner's move is the same? What happens in that scenario? We're facing off each other in the middle of the noonday sun, in the middle of the street, poised for action, and yet neither one of us are pulling the trigger. Neither one of us are moving towards the other, turning towards the other. And so instead what happens is you continue to escalate these cycles until there's sort of this icy cold standoff. And yes, I'm aware that I'm mixing lots of different metaphors here. I'm just trying to bring this concept alive as best I can. And so it's very difficult from a therapist standpoint to be able to work with partners when both are so reluctant and the relationship feels so unsafe to begin to open up and engage. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Withdraw cycles that are rooted in both partners leaning towards or being more of an avoidant style of attachment. Let's get started.
Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast that provides support and guidance to help heal the wounds of attachment trauma. Whether you find yourself struggling with unresolved issues in the past or have experienced trauma in your current relationship, our goal is to provide accurate, scientifically informed information, as well as the tools to help you create a secure connection between you and your partner. And here's your host, Tom Philp.
Okay, withdraw cycles. So as I mentioned in the opening, Withdrawers stem from an avoidant style of attachment, and this shows up in the relationship when there are ruptures or misattunements that lead to disconnection. Now, I want to emphasize again that much of this, as I said, it shows up in the relationship. When there's enough safety in the relationship, insecure attachment styles don't show up. They only show up when there's been a rupture, when there's been a disconnection and a break in the emotional bond. That's when these styles tend to show up. So if you're reflecting on your relationship and you're recalling lots of times where, well, I don't know if my partner's moving away or shutting down or withdrawing, or I don't know if I do it, that may be because you're connected most of the time to your partner. And when there's a secure connection, these insecure styles don't show up. But if you reflect on a time, you might be able to see that this pattern plays out when there's ruptures and disconnection that occurs. So I just want to recap for a moment. What does it mean when we talk about avoidant style of attachment? Well, there's certain things that happen that indicate somebody has an avoidant style of attachment. And the first one is the avoidance of anxiety or fear. So they're moving away from that which they feel uncomfortable with inside themselves. Obviously, there's an interpersonal component because they're also moving away from their partner by avoiding conflict, avoiding arguments, or any kind of tension in the relationship. And so when that tension rises, it creates feelings inside them, and they, want to move away from the feeling. And they do so in part by shutting things down interpersonally, by dismissing their partner's concerns, by deflecting, by minimizing. These are all tools in the avoidance arsenal that they use to avoid conflict and, most importantly, to avoid the anxiety that the conflicts bring up inside of them. They obviously shut down, they withdraw, and they might even physically remove themselves from their partner, all in an effort to control their own fear and their own anxiety when that comes up for them. They get quiet when they're overwhelmed, and they may even appease their partner to stop the fight. Okay, you're right. Yep, okay, that's fine. You're right. I get it. No, you're right. And so you can tell in the tone of voice, like I just used there, they're not really agreeing, but they just don't want to argue. They don't want the anxiety and the tension that emerges in the relationship. And so they use all of these tactics and these moves when they feel there's a threat to the relationship. And again, this could throw them into some past trauma. Maybe they get triggered and they feel like, okay, once again, I'm going to be left, abandoned, or rejected. Once again, I'm going to feel not good enough, like I can't measure up. And so all that's kind of packed in internally in their withdrawing response. And again, all this is characterized by an avoidance style of attachment, which, as you may or may not know, is characterized by low anxiety and high avoidance. So the way they manage their anxiety is to immediately distance themselves from it. So they're not necessarily feeling anxious. They're not necessarily recognizing that they're anxious, but what they are doing is moving away from that feeling internally, and it looks like on the outside that they don't care, that they don't have a care in the world, that they are sort of locked down from the outside. I remember when I was working through some of my own past experiences and hurts and wounds, I was in a group setting, and we were doing some role-playing as therapists, and I started having tremendous amounts of emotion, tremendous amounts of fear and anxiety internally, but I wasn't saying much at all. As a true avoidant or withdrawer myself, I was locked down. And I remember a comment later from one of the therapists and supervisors that said that your eyes were screaming. And I believe that. I really do. My body was locked down. I felt like I was trying to compose myself as much as possible. And I'm sure my eyes were screaming. I'm sure they were speaking volumes in that particular scenario, but inside it was like a volcano was going off. So I think that's important to remember in each partner. And if you're a withdrawer and you have a withdrawing partner, you might reflect on the fact that what's happening inside them might very much be the same of what's happening inside you, which is there's lots of anxiety, lots of tension, lots of wanting to shut this down, wanting to move away, wanting there to be peace. And a lot of that is probably going on for the partner as well. So imagine if both partners use this style of coping during ruptures in the relationship. How can they ever get to a place where they can communicate what is really happening inside one another? And how will they ever communicate what they really need from one another as long as they continue to move away from the tension and the anxiety that might lead to any repair of these ruptures? Another metaphor that sort of comes to mind for me is like two partners on a tightrope, and they're walking towards each other, and they're precariously having to balance the tightrope itself so that neither one of them gets toppled over. They're walking towards each other because they crave each other's company and support and companionship. But the fear of falling makes them maintain a safe distance from each other. So they reach out for more emotional connection. It's like taking a step towards each other on the tightrope. It's a risky move, and they can lead to greater closeness or a destabilizing tumble, right? So if either one of them makes too much of a sudden move, the whole thing could fall apart. So the withdrawer it's like retreating back to the individual sides. When they get back to their platforms, they're safe. It's not precarious. There's not so much of a risk of both of them falling. And so even though they're longing to move towards each other, the risk it takes and the balance it takes to not upset the rope enough that the whole thing tumbles over keeps them safe on each side. And so while they seek familiar comfort, while they long to be connected, they actually seek that comfort and that independence because that's what keeps them safe on each side. So that's kind of another way I like to think about this. You know, two partners, there's a standoff. If we use the old Western metaphor, both of them are poised to reach for their guns, yet they just stare at each other. And I also like the idea that there's these two people balancing on a tightrope that desperately want to move towards each other, but it's such a risk because if one partner goes faster than the other, if one partner makes a more sudden move than the other, it becomes unsafe. And so as a result, they just retreat to each side of their platform and stay there in their safety and yet longing deep down for a sense of connection. So much of the question becomes then, okay, we've got this withdraw cycle. How do couples de-escalate these cycles? And when we talk about de-escalating cycles, as you might have guessed, in a withdrawal cycle, you don't have a lot of high conflict with these couples. They're not raising their voices. They're not screaming or yelling. It's very, very rare if they get to that point. But they're still caught in this cycle. So when we say de-escalate, what we really mean is how do they break out of these cycles so that they create enough safety within the relationship that they can begin to have the important conversations they really need to be having. And that we call de-escalation because the cycle's no longer dominating the relationship. The couple is able to break out of that and have moments of meeting with each other, real heartfelt, vulnerable meetings. Even if it's just for a few minutes, even if it's just once a week, can the couple de-escalate enough to change that cycle so that it doesn't dominate the relationship? Well, there's three things I think I want you to reflect on if you feel like you are caught in a withdrawal cycle. The first thing I want you to reflect on is using the attachment lens to understand your partner's behavior. Oftentimes what happens is when we get caught in our protective places, we can see all of the triggers and all the things our partner is doing wrong without looking through an attachment lens. An attachment lens has certain built-in assumptions to it. And one of the most basic assumptions of an attachment lens is that everybody deep down in their core, embedded in their DNA, is the need for a secure attachment. And that doesn't go away. No matter how much trauma there is, no matter the size of the wound, no matter how much has happened in that person's life, or how quickly they move into their protective places, there is still embedded deep within them the need for a safe, secure connection. As John Bowlby, the creator of attachment theory, says, from cradle to grave, we long for safe, secure connections. So I want to challenge you to look at your partner through that lens. And I know that's hard when you've been triggered. I know that's hard when that trauma reemerges inside you, because it speaks of fear and it speaks of protection, and everything your body's telling you in those moments is to be safe, to put up your walls, to retreat, to fight or flight. But I want to challenge you to try to create a lens through which you can see your partner, that even if they are retreating, there is still a deep longing for them to have a safe, secure attachment with you. And in retreating and in withdrawing, what they're actually doing is in a way they are fighting for the relationship. They are advocating for the relationship, for the disconnection that's occurring. Now, they're doing it in a way that actually contributes to the cycle. It perpetuates the cycle, because that's what protection does. Our defenses and our protective strategies actually perpetuate cycles further. That's why it's so important for us to learn how we protect ourselves and to try to take risks to move out of that place of protection. That's why there's so much talk about vulnerability, because couples can really only connect through their vulnerability. So if you look at your partner through the lens of attachment, then what you're going to begin to see is that they're longing for a safe, secure connection with you, but they are stuck in places where they often don't know how to create that. And their defenses, their withdrawing, is trying to keep them safe until they feel like they have the skills and abilities to come out of their shell or to let down their walls and to re-engage. And maybe you as a withdrawer can identify with that too. So again, we're talking about both partners here in a withdrawal pattern. So if you understand that they're hurting, they're afraid, and they're lonely, then that using that attachment lens can sort of help reframe what it is you might be experiencing, not only within yourself, but what your partner might be experiencing as well. Oftentimes, I'll do this with my couples. Matter of fact, it's one of the first things that I do. We call it attachifying behaviors. And what I will do is I will take a behavior and I will attachify it. Oh, that makes sense to me. I get that. So you put up your walls to protect yourself because it feels very vulnerable to let down those walls, to let your partner see you in this place that you rarely show to anybody, and you're not sure how they're going to respond to it because you so long for them to see this part of you, but you're not comfortable. It doesn't feel safe when you're caught in these cycles to really let down your walls and to embrace a sense of connection so that you can feel really seen and really heard and really understood at a deep level. So that instead of focusing on the walls and the impact that wall creates, because the person knows, anybody that's put up walls knows that it's not a healthy place to be, knows that it doesn't get them closer to their goals, but they feel helpless to be able to move out of that. Well, when I consistently with my couples use an attachment lens and I interpret their actions and behaviors and words through that lens, then it begins to shine a light on the other side of that protective wall, which is the longings and the hope and then the attachment needs that are beneath that. So I'd encourage you to try to see your partner through that attachment lens, and yourself as well, I should add. Try to interpret your own behavior through that attachment lens. I got really mad. I got really upset. I raised my voice. Why? Because I so want my partner to hear me. I so want to have a connection and to feel close to my partner. And when I raise my voice, it's because my level of frustration is such that I don't have that connection. In some ways, I am protesting that disconnection. I'm protesting against our rupture because I so long and need and want that connection. So I challenge you to think about viewing yourself and your partner through that attachment lens. Now, the second thing I want you to try to do is embrace your vulnerable emotion. And I did another podcast a while back on this where I talked about lingering in that vulnerability. You have to linger and hold that vulnerable emotion long enough that you can actually speak from that place. That's in part how we identify our attachment needs. And that was in the podcast, I believe, identifying or understanding your attachment needs. Well, you have to do that by being able to linger in that vulnerable emotion. A relationship can't survive without an emotional bond. A relationship is, at the very heart, an emotional bond. It's not a negotiation. It's not a meeting of the minds. It is not an intellectual endeavor. All those things might be icing on the cake. You might be really compatible intellectually with your partner. They might challenge you and broaden you to see certain things, certain ways, and you love that about the relationship. But I promise you that intellectually, when there's a rupture, you're not responding because of their different ideology. You're responding because the emotional connection, the emotional bond has been bent or severed or disconnected in those moments. So not being able to reconnect, not being able to rebond with our partner means that we end up living in this place of emotional starvation. And both partners end up feeling that way when we're caught in these withdrawal cycles. So learning how to avoid your emotions with your partner. Often you try and make things worse by expressing them. You don't want to speak up, and this is what I hear a lot, especially from withdrawal cycles and avoidant partners, is I don't want to speak up because I don't want to make things worse. And it seems like every time I say something, I'm afraid it's going to make it worse. And I get that. That makes total sense to me. But by not doing that, then what you're actually showing your partner is that you're not engaged and you're not responsive to what's happening in the relationship, and that it's more still-faced. So getting nothing is worse than getting something. And so I would challenge you to be able to embrace your vulnerable emotion and then be able to hold in that and linger in that long enough to engage in the relationship. And you can this is an old trick, but it often works, and that is use I statements. I think, I want, I need, I feel. And so you can even begin to break the ice, begin to engage by holding that vulnerable emotion long enough that you can begin to use I statements and say, I feel so alone when we are disconnected. I long to have a closer connection to you. I need to feel closer to you. I want to feel more loved and cared for. I feel it's missing in our relationship. And I want to be a better partner to you. And I want you to learn how to be a better partner to me. Those are all I think, I want, I need, and I feel statements. Those are great ways to begin to open up and engage emotionally and be more responsive to your partner. And then finally, there's one little caveat to withdrawal cycles that I've seen, and I want to throw this out there for your understanding and education because I think it's important to know. As I said, these often are withdrawal cycles are often not the primary cycles that couples get locked in. That oftentimes I see these as secondary cycles. What I mean is that often the cycle initiated, which was more of a pursue withdrawal cycle. So one partner usually is more anxiously attached and pursues during disconnection, and the other partner might be more of a true withdrawer and withdraw during disconnection. But what can often happen is the pursuer can become so exhausted in the relationship that they can actually become what we call an exhausted pursuer. So they just quit pursuing. So they look like a withdrawer, but they're not really a withdrawer by nature. And so what I've seen with some of my couples, especially when I see the withdrawal cycles, is when I can get both of them to start engaging with each other again, that can reignite the internal flame, and one partner can go back to their normal, more anxious style, because now they're starting to see some change in the relationship. And now they're starting to see their partner engage more, which fills them up more, gives them more of what they need, so they are becoming less exhaustive, more active, more energized, and more hopeful in being able to get what they want from the relationship. So it is possible that a withdraw cycle may be that one partner is an exhausted pursuer, so it looks like they're withdrawing, and in fact they are withdrawing, that's what they're doing, but it looks like they're a true withdrawer, when if we can begin to de-escalate and restructure that, then what really happens is you have that partner begin to re-engage in the relationship, and sometimes their anxious pursuant nature comes back out, and they start feeling hopeful because they start getting more of what they need. And then we can go back to a pursue-withdraw cycle and deal with that as well if we need to in therapy or in your own lives. So I hope you've learned a little bit today about the withdrawal cycle. As I said, this is not the most common one, but it absolutely happens. It absolutely occurs. And there are two partners that can be attracted to each other that are both more avoidant styles of attachment. And so, when there is that disconnection, then it can create those withdrawal cycles. Hey, I want to thank you so much for listening. I really am thankful for you all and appreciate it. And I watch the numbers and I see who's tuning in, and people all across the world are listening to this, and I just couldn't be more grateful for it. I hope it's helpful. I hope you're learning things from it. I hope it's impacting your relationships wherever you are. And so don't forget, you are welcome to reach out at any time. I would love to help you guys with these concepts. We can create a coaching call anywhere in the world. So feel free to go to our website, traumafreerelationship.com. You can learn more about me, learn more about the coaching, and I can meet you online, and we can dig into some of the things you're learning and really help you and your partner and your relationship be more fulfilling. Thank you once again, and until next time, we'll talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.